How does a banana trigger a CIA-backed coup? Do AirPods herald the arrival of a new global order? What do LED lights say about the future of humanity? I'm Ed Conway, and in each episode of my new podcast, Stuff Matters, I take an object, crack it open, and reveal the world-shaping forces hidden inside. This is economics told through the things we think we understand. Search Stuff Matters on your podcast app to listen and follow.
Hello, good morning and welcome. Keir Starmer has left Andy Burnham with a just under £5 billion black hole to fill in his first budget before the end of the year. The outgoing PM failed to fully fund the defence investment plan he and Chancellor Rachel Reeves have been working on for 10 months. And that has certainly caught the Burnham team by surprise, a reminder of the hard fiscal reality looming for the new guy in number 10. And Burnham had to find out like everyone else. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Right, the new package for defence added £15 billion over 4 years, but a single line in the accounting revealed that the defence investment programme will have £4.7 billion of which to be funded at budget 2026. Now, this means Andy Burnham's premiership begins fiscally below water, having to make cuts or raise taxes, right? 10 months of work on this and there's still a black hole. And they weren't even able to cover the smaller uplift that they were going to promise to John Healey. I mean, it isn't that they've given more money to Dan Jarvis and that's caused a problem. You know, this wouldn't have covered even the first amount that was going to be announced a month ago. But the scale of the black hole, and I can reveal, is worse than that. The problem is bigger than that. Right, there are £2 billion expected from some departments like Ed Milibands, Desnes, and there's £4 billion from cutting capital projects across the board, and they all haven't been announced because, Anne, in the main, they haven't been decided. So it's not just the £4.7 billion of cuts that Andy Burnham's got to find. Individual new cabinet ministers are going to have to start in their jobs by working out what to axe, what to move to the right. So the true figure is just a bit bigger than £5 billion. Now, the Treasury point out that £5 billion or so of capital spending changes are a drop in the ocean compared to the £1 trillion of government spending. But if it was that easy, why couldn't they manage to sort this out in 10 months? And I am, Anne, old enough to remember when Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer came into government complaining from every hilltop that the Tories did just similar by cutting budgets and failing to fully fund them. And that's no wonder that Team Burnham are, for the first time in this transition, I think, properly furious, right? They've really avoided briefing until now, but it was made clear to me yesterday they are cross about this because they didn't know, and it's a big headache.
Yeah, I think irritation is building up exactly as you say on that score. It's underlying as well, isn't it? Because I guess Keir Starmer is saying, yeah, over to you. You wanted this, Andy Burnham. I've been trying to say I'm having difficulty getting these sums to add up. And yeah, that's a big question, I think, about the defence investment plan is, does it answer the big questions about what we are doing and where we are putting resource? And in fact, defence policy, which has been somewhat underweighted while everybody was fighting about the money. So what do we get for now? Well, the funding supports £5 billion investment in drones, clear switch in priority there from big pieces of kit to drones and the accompanying technology base. Plans to create a much greater degree of hybridity, as a hybrid navy, as well as uncrewed land vehicles. So there's a lot of AI and automation going on there. And in fairness, that is very expensive. And the next generation of RAF aircraft, an £8.6 billion investment under the Global Combat Air Programme. That's jointly with Italy and Japan, etc. That's what we're going to get. We know in terms of air power. It will fund also an £11 billion investment for munitions and weapons because UK stockpiles are very depleted. A lot of them went to the front line in Ukraine in those crucial early months and year. Caught my eye also over £3 billion in space capability, pointing us to the future of warfare there, and the renewal of the nuclear deterrent, which always It adds a budget line of quite some heft. Interesting detail there, Sam, on developing a sovereign warhead. This is the Astrea, which has been in the works for some time to replace all of those old warheads we know from the Cold War films, and the introduction of new Dreadnought class submarines. So that goes together to upgrade our nuclear capability. By the way, the Astrea is named after the goddess of justice and precision. So someone in the MOD has a sort of Dr. Strangelove sense of humour. It is, in the end, a stonking great nuke.
Yes, it doesn't feel like defence spending is a precision instrument. And let's be clear, Anne, because for all the pain, this is nowhere near enough, according to all our military chief friends. From 2027 onwards, the UK will now spend 2.7% of its GDP on core NATO defence spending. But the UK has committed, like other countries, to spend 3.5% of GDP by 2035. And that is all without working out how. So we are back to that old conundrum of setting a target of how much we're going to spend without knowing how we're going to pay for it or what we're going to spend it on, right? So how much is the gap between 2.7% of GDP next year and 3.5% by 2035? Well, our old friend Paul Johnson, former head of the IFS, has been doing calculations on the back of an envelope. It's £25 billion a year. £25 billion a year, which is more than several government departments, to get to that target. Now, because I'm a masochist, I have been flicking through some of the summaries of old NAO reports into the MOD because I just wanted to remind myself of the bottomless money pit of over-optimism, disappointing returns, false economies, and bad accounting that is the MOD, which we are now throwing money at. And somehow the fact is that the military, because it's the military, get a reputational shield somewhat, unlike other bits of Whitehall, bit of a free pass. But, given that sum, £25 billion a year, alongside the pressures of an ageing population on the NHS and pensions, it all just feels impossible. But that's the sort of known unknowns. My big question to you, Anne, this morning is: do you think that what we've got out of it is worth it? What do you from talking to people on the defence side and from what you're hearing? Are they at least going to be satisfied a little bit?
So I hit up a couple of defence companies, drone producers, and the like yesterday, and just said, don't give me your entire list of complaints about what the government's got wrong in defence policy, because that would have been a rather long call. But just said, just give me the top line. And I would say, honestly, I found a mixture of relief that the plan is there at all, notwithstanding that extraordinary eye-popping black hole that you've just laid out there. After all, it's been the best part of a year. One of the big worries for the sector, in terms of the industry sector, and the fact that Britain wants to get itself into this big game of being one of the major defence producers in Europe, not least given the retreat of the US, but also for our own reasons, to make money out of a defence sector where we are not terribly badly positioned. They are just relieved it's there, Sam, and they will take what my colleague Andrew MacDonald yesterday in Playbook called the skinny dip of the Defence Investment Plan, which would definitely been on a low calorie diet.
Me feeling naked.
Mister. So that I would say there is, while we're being a bit bleak here, there is some relief about that, because they kind of know, even if the figures don't add up, as one source there said in the industry, at least you got sense where the government had to make some hard choices and where it put them. So if you're in that sector, that you can go out there and do your investment or plan for your next level of products, etc. So I thought that was, if there's a small sliver of light about this. The bit that I think is not landing so well, and particularly overseas, I'm going to a big defence conference in Berlin tomorrow, hosted by my colleagues at Welt, their newspaper in the same group as I'm in. And one of the points that I think we're hearing a lot there is reported by Esther Weber and Mason Boycott, owned for us at Politico, that there's sort of, there's worry that the defence savings are not realistic. There's supposed to be, the one thing you didn't mention on your grim list, 10.7 billion of efficiency savings from the MOD Really? Okay, let's see when they come on board, and certainly abroad, that worry that the NATO targets, that's seen as perhaps, a bit lame, and that we keep talking big about what Britain is doing in defence. Yes, we are massive frontline supporters for Ukraine and highly valuable. But if you judge us by the NATO targets, we're getting there very peu à peu, and probably not fast enough at all. So I think there's a bit of irritation about that. I did say that the former head of an armed service grudgingly said that this was all right for now. That was his quick text to me yesterday about the investment plan. Well, that was not the view of another air defence veteran who got in touch to say this is nonsense. It doesn't even touch the sides on air defence. There is some concern that there's perhaps over-investment in drones. Not that they don't want a big drone wall, etc., and big, really tough old drones that you can launch right into the heart of battlefield. But that's when you're already at war. And as this person said to me, what about before you're at war? You're just trying to see off the Russia threat and others. That is where the air defences, they thought, were poorly covered in this plan.
Without wishing to sound ratty this morning, of course they want more. They always want more. They want more.
Well, of course
What
they
a
should want
surprise.
more. I mean, why would they not want more?
They should live within their 20-minute limit. Look, as you know, I've spent over a couple of years now, looking at other bits of the government in detail, particularly why we don't get growth. And I mean, I think there are big lessons from yesterday about this, because what happened yesterday to make the sums not even add up, but just sort of partially add up, was that Rachel Reeves did what she promised. She promised she would not do as Chancellor. Now, remember the complaints about the Tories not funding things when Labour came in? Well, I mentioned earlier, well, there's another big promise that they kept making, which is that they wouldn't chop and change on other departments' capital budgets, right? Building projects, road projects, rail projects that get commissioned and then get canned because you need to make the sums add up, right? I can give you any number of times that Rachel Reeves promised she wouldn't do this, right? Take the spending review last November, 7 months ago. When faced with challenges, previous chancellors have chosen to decrease, delay, or cancel capital spending. Low investment is the cause of our productivity problems, not the solution. So my choice is not cuts. What did she do yesterday? Cuts to projects that mean growth, Anne. Right, so let's look at the bypass in Newark or a road in Derby, both gone overnight. The mayor of the East Midlands discovering while the Prime Minister was speaking. Let's look at that A38 in Derby in particular. First given consent by Grant Shapps in January 2021. 5 years of legal delays, multiple judicial reviews. Literally, that road was being built to connect with defence companies like Rolls-Royce. And gone, just like that. And the thing about those projects, Ant, is that they are growth multipliers. In other words, you put the money in, but because they enable sort of people to travel on them and to business to be conducted, they actually increase over time GDP. We're meant to have a 10-year infrastructure designed to lock in these things, to stop chopping and changing, but that's exactly what happens. And what happens when these projects are cancelled? Well, firms like the Swedish firm Skanska was building the Newbury Road. What compensation does it get? What's the premium that will be charged for similar projects in future? Because firms say they can't trust the British government and all of the quangos for stuff not to be cancelled at short notice. It is surely just not a way to run a government, however much chiefs want more money.
The Treasury would say that the overall amount of capital spending doesn't change, wouldn't they? And that's just a necessary reallocation to pay for a defence hike, which everybody agrees is so substantial along the lines of the money is going to come from somewhere and something is going to be gouged to a certain extent to pay for that. Although I do think you put your finger on a pain point, actually, which is just giving me some pause for thought, because I spent a bit of the week, as we talked about in the podcast last week, sort of looking at our own infrastructure, sort of the way that we run infrastructure in the UK. And there's been a bit of talk about some people at West Streeting who brought that up. But I think what I maybe underweighted a bit, looking at the fact that we'd sort of made some strides there in terms of the organisation and funding of infrastructure, is what happens then if the Treasury just goes in the old-fashioned way and pulls the rug from under it simply because they can't make the numbers add up, and they don't want to, or can't find the right borrowing mechanism to sort it out that way. So it does put the opposition on firm ground to run a counterattack, saying, well, which taxes are you going to raise? If this goes on, like, there seems to be one other answer that's in plain sight, and that is something that Andy Burnham does not really want to be the first question that he's asked when he comes out of that glossy black door in number 10 in his early days and weeks. So Keir Starmer did warn Burnham in his presentation that there are no easy answers in raising money. There's been a suggestion of defence bonds, which is advocated by some Burnham supporters, but it is borrowing by another name. And I think there's a question, there's been a bit of an unusually, because we usually get on very well with Canada, and particularly with Mark Carney in charge there. He has been trying to pull the UK into a defence bank, which would then be able to raise capital with sort of a reliable entity at low interest rates. But the Treasury, and as far as I gather, even Keir Starmer in his final days is not convinced by that model. And I think there's a worry that in order to fund defence at the next tier, which is going to have to happen, you get into more complex instruments, you get tangled up in perhaps more multilateralism than you're actually able to cope with. So I think that is really interesting that we are nowhere near anything like a final status here on our defence spending after all this time.
I could go on some time about people who maybe should shoulder a piece of the blame pie that I've been cooking this morning. But I actually think we should probably move on a touch, because we've got a couple of quite interesting bits of intel about the shape of the government. Anne, do you want to kick off with something that you've been hearing?
Yes, this is actually from my colleague Dan Bloom, and he reveals in Playbook that the Conservative ex-West Midlands Mayor Andy Street is in the running to oversee Labour's flagship nationalised rail network. Now, Street, according to those familiar with all of this, is now the leading candidate to chair Great British Railways. And that's going to run both track and trains from 2027. A boost there for Metro mayors. He's seen as someone able to work very well across party lines, very respected both for his business and civic background. I think there was a lot of sympathy for him when he lost the West Midlands mayoralty in 2024, if you remember. That was a dramatic moment, and he handled that with a good deal of grace and said that he did not blame anyone else for that, aka being a Tory mayor was not an easy place to be at that election. So this would be seen as a leap back into public life for him. Interesting question left in the air. Does this decision just come soon because things need to be got on with, or is it left to Burnham, given that there are political considerations involved here too? But if you just my halfpenny worth, I think Andy Street would be a palatable person for Burnham to show that this Metro Mayor malarkey isn't just lots of his old Labour mates in different places around the country. It wouldn't be bad there to have something cross-party in the mix.
Yeah, I also think that there was guidance from Cabinet Secretary Antonio Romeo not to announce things in this sort of purdah period that sort of don't have sign-off from the new administration. So I think not only did the optics work and the sort of politics for Andy Burnham work, I think actually the civil servants would make sure it did work for the incoming administration. I've got a new name for you, Anne, that could be quite a big figure joining our world in the coming weeks. Former Sadiq Khan aide Sarah Brown has joined Andy World. Sarah Brown has been appointed to do strategic comms, working for the next Prime Minister. We can call him the next Prime Minister now, I think. She is currently, or the job that she is sort of on lease from, is comms and strategy for Sadiq Khan, who she's worked for 10 years. And previously she was at the Department for Health. she is widely liked, like really well regarded, very straightforward to deal with. And there was chatty yesterday. I do just wonder whether she's going to end up being director of communications for Andy Burnham. It would sort of be a natural fit. And that was what MPs were raising with me yesterday. And I think that's a possibility.
That's a very interesting idea. She is well liked for those of us who've covered London and been around City Hall and Sadiq World. She's just a constant presence at his shoulder. I think in terms of communication style, I know this job would be strategic, probably rather than the grit of the day today. But yeah, it wouldn't be bad also to just keep that balance. We talked a lot about with the aim of 50% female senior staff. That's the aim for Andy Burnham, or rather an aim I think a lot of women around him and female Labour MPs kind of pressed on him, and that might just break down a little bit of the sourness that sometimes everyone sort of felt emanating, probably because of the strains and the strains of the Keir Starmer era. It sort of feels like something a bit more. She's quite an upbeat person, and I think that could go down quite well, actually. Let's see if it really comes to pass. This aim of 50% of women in all jobs, these targets, as we know, always sound easier to deliver than they are when you actually try to put the right people into the right jobs and get those calls right, which is very important. I think if there's one big negative potentially attached to the Burnham project, it's, are you able to handle the machine, the national machine at the centre, as well as doing it well in Manchester? So Burnham did address that, and he also acknowledged a rather obvious point that he wouldn't be the first female PM, something that someone had floated mischievously last week as a description to our friend Tim Shipman. Not a gift, I think, to Andy Burnham, that description, and having to work his way out of that one. But there's really has been some bitterness. We heard it from senior figures, Lisa Nandy, Lucy Powell and others, about a kind of manosphere in some top jobs around the present Prime Minister. All of this exercises minds, particularly if we try to think about how you balance out a possible return of David Miliband as Foreign Secretary, with his brother Ed also in a senior role. Spoiler alert, neither of them are women either. And that then means that your next tier of cabinet then does have to have senior female figures. And if you're scrapping for your role, possibly like Yvette Cooper, then you're thinking, you can't just keep getting rid of the women and bringing in more men if you've made that commitment. On the Milibands, it does seem that it is, we reported also earlier this week, that it is serious, this idea of David Miliband coming back from New York. A lot of people have raised the relationship of the Miliband brothers after the bad blood when they fell out during the leadership contest, which Ed Miliband won. But I do understand that they have been reconnected partly by their mother's very long illness, Marion, before she died recently. That has brought David back to the UK more. I mean, I've certainly bumped into him a lot more here. And I think that it means the brothers have had practical dealings in the way that families do at those sad times, and that has also paved the way to something of a rapprochement. So there wouldn't be maybe what the headline would have been a little while ago is, can these guys sit around a table together? That, I think, is something that's now seen to be broadly okay, and that they're able to get on with their own jobs.
There's a long piece by Ollie Wright in The Times with a great quote from a cabinet minister. You cannot have more Milibands than women at the top jobs. That kind of thing matters. He also gives a slightly more nuanced view of the relationship, a lot better than it was, but still not perfect, and occasionally having to go through proxies to deal with one another. But we will see. I cannot lecture military chiefs on living within their means and then bust too much longer over the 20 minutes. We heard the alarm in your last answer, so let's wrap it up there. PMQs and all the rest today. See you tomorrow.
PMQs it is. See you tomorrow.
How does a banana trigger a CIA-backed coup? Do AirPods herald the arrival of a new global order? What do LED lights say about the future of humanity? I'm Ed Conway, and in each episode of my new podcast, Stuff Matters, I take an object, crack it open, and reveal the world-shaping forces hidden inside. This is economics told through the things we think we understand. Search Stuff Matters on your podcast app to listen and follow.